A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. You heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, you have heard that it is said to your ancestors, do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow. But I say to you, do not swear at all. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. Pax Bonum. Father Chris here. The Gospel today that we just heard comes to us from the Sermon on the Mount. Let me begin by saying that I love the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus delivered this valuable message at the beginning of his ministry, and it is the longest of the recorded sermons by Jesus in the New Testament. To me, the Sermon on the Mount is an outline, a recipe, a set of instructions that helps us understand how to live in accordance to the teachings of Jesus. It teaches us how to live as a Christian, and it teaches us how to operate as a member of God's kingdom. The teachings provided through the Sermon on the Mount represent the major ideals of Christian life that we are all encouraged to both live and follow. Today's gospel represents Jesus as one who not only follows but respects the laws of the Torah. But more importantly, he is one who teaches the message that is consistent with the Torah, yet pertinent to the people he is addressing. Specifically, the reading today addresses 4 key aspects related to Jewish law. And Jesus shares this with his followers. And he begins by saying, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Now, to understand this, we really have to identify that at this point in history, both the scribes and the Pharisees measured one's virtue by their observation, the exterior observation of the law as they interpreted it. This often meant a literal interpretation of the recorded law. What we're going to find is that Jesus refers to the legalistic aspect of the law, but then expands upon its definition in a way that the people can understand it and apply it to their lives. Jesus does point out that the technical observance itself of the law is not enough if the spirit of the law has been broken. He's telling us that our own virtue and morality must supersede the legal approach to the law as it has been interpreted by the scribes and the Pharisees. Jesus is calling us not to simply keep the rule of law, but to embrace the spirit of the law and to respond to it with an integrity that's above the legal aspect. Another way of looking at it is that he's asking us to actually have a relationship with the law itself. For Jesus, real virtue comes from the actions of the heart, not through lip service alone. He expects honorable, honest, and respectful relationships between people. This doesn't mean that we have to agree on everything and that we can't have differences of opinion and that we can't disagree with another individual. We can. And realistically, we're going to. What it does mean is that we must do so respectfully, honestly, and with virtue of the heart. No name calling, no belittling, no going behind someone's back or gossiping to build ourselves up while we put others down. If we dare call ourselves Christians, we must first walk the talk. And then we must be honest and trustworthy with our actions and our words. We must be a person of our word and demonstrate that through our actions. As St. Francis of Assisi is said to have spoken, we have to preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words, meaning they should be able to tell we are a Christian, that we follow the gospel, that we live the teachings of the gospel just by observing us and our actions. On occasion, we may have to explain something, but they should be able to see us right off following the outline that Jesus has presented us with. Folks, the bottom line is actions speak louder than words. And we're going to be judged on our actions within the context of the words we use, within the words that we think. When we use those words and how we use those words. Jesus goes on within today's reading with some more examples of what he's talking about. He first refers to the law of the 10 Commandments sent forth by God to Moses. Thou shalt not murder. And if you do, you will be judged accordingly. Obviously, the definition of murder is the killing of another human being with malice that has been premeditated and has deliberate intent. But Jesus asks us to look beyond that simple definition of murder. He asks us to look beyond the legal definition of the law. He furthers the law by including anger towards another. He specifically says, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. The reason for the anger is presumed that to be taken into account at the time of judgment. Why are we angry? Was it justified, etc., etc.? But that's not our judgment. That's not the court or man's judgment, the scribes or the Pharisees' judgment, but God's judgment. Anger itself is a vicious and debilitating emotion. In fact, it's a killer, and it's interesting how Jesus brings up anger with thou shalt not murder. Today, through science, We understand that anger weakens the heart, not only spiritually, but physically as well. Did you know that within the 2 hours after you have an angry outburst, the chance of having a heart attack doubles? Outbursts in anger also increase the risk of stroke over 3 times to those who don't have an outburst. And then there's repressed anger. Anger where you express it indirectly, like being passive aggressive, or if you will go to great lengths to keep that anger within so as not to explode. That also has been associated with heart disease. In fact, one study found that people that are prone to anger, as in a personality trait, were twice at risk of having coronary heart disease than their less angry peers. And then, if you're mad all the time, you just maybe start feeling sick, not feeling well, always feeling a tad bit under the weather. And that's because anger also weakens our immune system and makes us more prone to various viruses and bacterias. Now, Jesus doesn't say not to get angry. Anger itself is actually a very normal and can be a healthy emotion. We need to understand how to control that anger, how to not even control it, but how to work with that anger. This is sometimes called constructive anger. The kind where you speak up directly to the person that you're angry with. The kind where you speak and deal with the frustration at hand in an effective and problem-solving manner, without outbursts, without backstabbing, without exaggerating the events surrounding the situation by placing or misplacing blame. It's not about gossiping to others about others. Instead, it's handling the situation honestly, honorably, and trustworthy, being respectful of the individual and the situation. And guess what? If you handle anger in this manner, the studies show it does not adversely affect our health at all. Now, there is some good news if you do experience some anger. You can learn to control those strong feelings of annoyance, displeasure, hostility, all these feelings and emotions that build up and create anger. First, begin by removing yourself from what's making you angry. And once you do that, then start to identify the triggers that have made you angry. Look deep. It's like an onion. Peel it back, layer by layer. You may find that it's not the person that made you angry, maybe not even the actions of the person that made you angry, but something that's within you that remains unresolved. One of my spiritual teachers many years ago said, "You cannot love or hate anything within another person unless you love or hate that within yourself." So look at it maybe from that view. Once you figure that out, then you can start to make some changes. How you respond to the anger, how you address the issue, and then you will be able to act accordingly. In the end, it's all about how we communicate with ourselves, with others, and with God. Jesus then goes on with today's reading and addresses another of the 10 Commandments. In this case, adultery. Many cultures have historically considered adultery, and many still do, a very serious crime within their society. Those that have been found guilty of adultery throughout the centuries, throughout the varying cultures, have been subject to severe punishments. Unfortunately, it's been more on females and males, but nonetheless, the penalty has included capital punishment, mutilation of the individual's body, even torture. Per the letter of the law, adultery is defined as an extramarital sexual affair that is considered objectionable on social, religious, moral, and legal grounds. In Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, adultery is viewed by many jurisdictions as offensive to the public morals that in turn undermine the sanctity of the relationship of marriage. Now, Jesus takes adultery, even further, up another level, up another notch. He says that if anyone looks at a woman, and in this day and age or a man, with lust, they have already committed adultery with that person within their own heart. The key concept here is the lust. Lust springs forth from personal selfishness and greed. Lust is essentially to crave something, usually associated with worldly desires of carnal pleasure or material possession. Lust is focused on gratifying oneself, and it often leads to toxic actions in order to fulfill those desires with no consideration to the consequences it produces. In short, if we have been committed to another, if we are in a Christian relationship, we give our heart to that individual. In fact, we give our entire being to that individual. To crave another's attention with lust, well, that's a sin in God's eye. It's adultery. And adultery is a sin. And finally, Jesus asks us to be true to our word, to be true to ourselves. He states, let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. For anything else is from the evil one. In other words, all you simply need to do is say yes or no and mean yes or no. If you say yes, but no is really what is your intent or what you end up doing, or the other way around, that comes from the evil one, Satan, or our adversary, which could even be ourselves. It does not come from God. Jesus tells us not to break our oaths, our word, for our oath and our word is our bond. This means that our word should be committed like a promise and kept accordingly. Don't take or make a meaningless oath, one that you have no intention on keeping. Jesus says that basically oath or no oath simply mean what you say and stand behind that. Christians must be truthful in all circumstances. Truthful to God, truthful to others, and truthful to ourselves. To sum it up, Real virtue comes from the actions of our heart, and it's measured in our proceedings and the validity of what our word really means. Ask yourself, does yes mean yes and no mean no when you're speaking with someone? Can you stand behind your word? Is your oath your bond? Do you say what you mean and mean what you say? Or are you two-faced? Are we being truthful to the virtue of the law, or are we being superficial, playing it from the legal side of the law in order to suit a means that favor ulterior motives or a secret agenda? And are those interactions that we have with others, with God, with ourselves, honorable, honest, humble, respectful? Are we serving God the way Jesus teaches us to? Or are we serving our own ego and ambitions, which in turn serves the evil one? Remember, His will be done, not our will be done. If you identify flaws within yourself as a result of this, that's actually a good thing, because now you have something to work on. Because if we don't follow the law, as Jesus has pointed out, we can't enter the kingdom of God. With that, I leave you with Pax Bonum, peace and good to all. And again, this is Father Chris from the In His Holy Name Ministry, the Order of Franciscans of Joy of the Gospel with the Independent Catholic Church of the Americas, asking you to remember to act justly, love with mercy, and walk humbly with God. Until we meet again.